The first thing Ava noticed when she walked into the cafe was how loud her heart was. It wasn't nerves, not exactly. Ava Moore didn't get nervous. Not when she was negotiating billion-dollar acquisitions. Not when she stood in front of shareholders to defend her bold, sometimes reckless vision for the company. And certainly not for a blind date set up by her meddling younger sister who thought Ava's biggest flaw was her inability to just relax and fall in love like a normal person. No, Ava's heart pounded for a different reason, because for the first time in years, she was showing up as someone she wasn't. She wore jeans that didn't cost $1,000, a worn leather jacket borrowed from her driver, and a faded navy t-shirt with no visible branding. Her hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, and the vintage watch on her wrist was a $15 flea market find, swapped specifically to avoid flashing her usual Cartier. Today, she wasn't CEO Ava Moore. She was just Ava. And for some inexplicable reason, that terrified her. She spotted the woman at a corner table. She was reading, completely unaware of her surroundings, one hand wrapped around a ceramic mug, the other turning the pages slowly, like she was savoring every word. Her dark curls framed a face that was all angles and contradictions, soft lips, strong brows, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and still chose to be kind. Ava's breath caught, because this woman wasn't what she'd expected. She wasn't polished or made up for the date. She wasn't posing or scrolling on her phone. She was just there. Present. Real. And when she looked up, the faintest smile curving her lips, Ava felt something in her chest shift. Hi. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments, on a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference, Ava said, suddenly unsure of what to do with her hands. You must be Grace. Grace stood to greet her, offering a firm, warm handshake. And you're Ava. You're actually on time. That's rare for these things. Her voice was low and rich, like late-night radio, with the trace of a laugh beneath every word. Ava sat down, trying to remember what normal people said on first dates. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been on one without a background check and prenup floating in the background. Yeah, well, punctuality is one of my more dazzling traits. Grace raised an eyebrow, amused. Good to know. I'll add that to your file. Ava blinked. You're keeping a file on me? Mental file, Grace said smoothly. So far, you're mysterious, sarcastic, and clearly uncomfortable with compliments. I'm intrigued. Ava laughed before she could stop herself. It felt good. Different. They talked. For hours. Ava didn't touch her phone once, didn't glance at the time. Grace told her about the nonprofit she worked for, helping kids aging out of foster care find housing and jobs. She spoke with quiet passion, hands moving expressively when she got excited, her eyes lighting up every time she mentioned one of her kids, as she called them. Ava listened, enthralled. She told Grace half-truths, said she worked in operations, and that she consulted for mid-sized companies, which technically wasn't a lie, just selective. It wasn't about deceit, she told herself. It was about not letting the wrong things matter too soon. She'd dated women who cared more about her bank account than her heartbeat. She was tired of those eyes, the ones that saw her last name before they saw her. Grace never asked about money, or her car, or where she lived. She only asked questions that made Ava think, laugh, open up in ways she hadn't in years. The moment the waitress brought their check, Ava instinctively reached for it, then hesitated. Right. She was pretending to be broke. Want to split it? Grace offered, already reaching for her purse. Ava paused. Actually, do you mind if I get it? You paid for the coffees, and I'd feel weird if I didn't at least get lunch. Grace studied her for a second, then nodded. All right. But next time, I'm buying. Next time. Ava's stomach fluttered. After they walked outside, they stood there for a beat, neither of them moving. The city was loud around them, horns and voices and wind slicing through September sun, but Ava heard none of it. Only Grace. I had a really good time, Ava said quietly. Me too, Grace replied, softer than before. Then, a pause. You're different from what I expected. Ava swallowed. In a good way, I hope. Grace leaned in, her voice a near whisper. The best way. And then, with a touch so light it barely counted as contact, she brushed her fingers against Ava's arm before turning and walking away. Ava stood frozen on the sidewalk, feeling the ghost of that touch, heart pounding like she'd just survived a boardroom battle. She didn't know what the hell had just happened, but for the first time in a long, long time she wanted more. Ava replayed every second of the date in her mind for the next 48 hours like it was a scene from a movie she wasn't ready to stop watching. Grace's smile, her dry wit, the way she listened, not just waited to speak, but listened, like Ava's words mattered even when they were carefully curated lies. She didn't know why it had hit her so hard. Maybe because the date hadn't felt like a performance. Maybe because she hadn't felt like a product. She'd gone in pretending to be someone else, but with Grace, she'd somehow ended up closer to her real self than she had in years. And that scared her more than she wanted to admit. So when Grace texted her the next morning, I found a cafe with absurdly good almond croissants. Want to help me judge them ruthlessly? Ava stared at the screen for a full 10 minutes before answering. Only if we also judge their coffee, like pretentious snobs. That earned her a smiley face with sunglasses and a time to meet the next day. It was fast. Too fast. Ava didn't do second dates after one day. But she didn't say no. She didn't want to. This time, she wore another borrowed jacket, scuffed boots, and left her driver 2 blocks away so he wouldn't be seen. The cafe was smaller, cozier, and Grace was already there. Again reading, again completely absorbed, again absolutely stunning in the least deliberate way. This time, when she looked up, her smile was immediate and bright. Hey, you came. I said I would. You'd be surprised how many people flake after a good first date. Ava slid into the seat across from her. Why would anyone flake on you? Grace tilted her head. That's dangerously close to a compliment. Should I add that to your file? Definitely. And while you're at it, add selectively charming under pressure. They ordered croissants and coffee, and the conversation flowed like they were old friends meeting for the 100th time. Grace was warmer today, more open. She talked about the frustrations of underfunding, the joy of seeing a teen get accepted into college, the heartbreak of losing one to the streets. Ava didn't interrupt. She just watched, and listened, and felt something in her chest pull tighter every time Grace spoke with her whole heart. It wasn't just attraction. It wasn't just admiration. It was something more dangerous. Something like longing. When Grace asked about her life, Ava stuck to the same vague lines. Consulting's not always exciting, but I like the challenge. I work with a lot of logistics teams. Problem solving is my thing. I can see that, Grace said, sipping her coffee. You seem like the kind of person who thrives under pressure. But there's something about you, she leaned in slightly. You don't talk like someone who answers to anyone. Ava swallowed. Maybe I don't. Independent. Confident. A little mysterious. What's the catch? Ava forced a smile. Isn't mystery part of the fun? Grace narrowed her eyes but let it go.
For now.
After the date, they walked together through the park nearby. Leaves crunched under their feet, the early signs of autumn in full swing. Their hands brushed once, and neither of them pulled away. Grace told a story about trying to cook for one of her teen clients and setting off a smoke alarm. Ava laughed so hard her stomach hurt. I don't cook either, Ava admitted. Too many moving parts. I like control. Ah, Grace said with mock seriousness. A control freak. That explains a lot. Don't judge me. Never, Grace said, and she meant it. They stopped near a fountain. The sunlight hit Grace's face in just the right way, and Ava felt something raw and electric course through her. She wanted to kiss her.
So badly.
But she didn't. She couldn't. Not with the lie still sitting between them like a ticking bomb. I should go, Ava said, her voice tight. Everything okay? Grace looked genuinely concerned. Ava nodded too fast. Yeah, just early meeting tomorrow. You sure?
Yeah.
She forced another smile, hating it. Grace touched her wrist gently. Okay. But next time, you don't get to escape so easily. Ava nodded and turned before she could say something real. She walked quickly, each step away from Grace heavier than the last. When she got home to her penthouse, a space that suddenly felt colder than usual, she stood at the window for a long time, staring out at the skyline. The lie wasn't sustainable. She knew that. Grace deserved more. But Ava also knew how people changed when they found out who she really was. The softness disappeared. The masks came out. The questions started. And the expectations. She'd been touched by genuine affection tonight, and it felt like a drug she didn't know how to handle. Her phone buzzed. A message from Grace. Next time, I want the full story. You're too interesting to be this vague. Ava stared at the screen, chest tight, lips parted. She typed a reply. Then deleted it. Then typed again. Finally, she sent, soon. I promise. But even as she sent it, she wasn't sure if she could keep that promise. Because the deeper she fell, the more dangerous the truth became. And Grace? She was already starting to mean too much. Ava stood outside the entrance of Grace's apartment building, holding 2 cups of coffee and feeling absolutely ridiculous. She didn't do surprises. She didn't do early morning drop-ins. She didn't stand on sidewalks like some rom-com idiot hoping to impress the girl with overpriced pastries and an undercooked lie. And yet here she was. It had been 3 days since their second date. 3 days of pretending she wasn't checking her phone every 5 minutes. 3 days of waking up with Grace's laugh echoing in her mind like a song she couldn't get out of her head. She'd caved when Grace texted her a meme at midnight, something dumb, something that made her laugh out loud in bed. Ava replied, and somehow that turned into a full conversation, then a phone call, then Grace saying sleepily, I wish you were here, before yawning and falling asleep on the line. Ava hadn't slept after that. She'd lain there, staring at her ceiling, wanting things she hadn't let herself want in years. So now she was here, standing on concrete like a woman who had no idea what she was doing. The door opened, and Grace stepped out, wearing leggings, a hoodie, and an expression that melted immediately into delight. You brought coffee? And croissants, Ava said, holding up the bag. I figured we could sit in the park, talk, and judge strangers together. Grace grinned. This is dangerously close to a 3rd date. Is that a bad thing? Grace took the coffee and sipped it, her eyes not leaving Ava's.
No.
It's a very, very good thing. They walked together to the same park, sitting on a bench near the fountain where they'd almost kissed. The leaves were more golden now, the air cooler. Ava noticed everything. The way Grace tucked her knees up when she sat. The way her nose scrunched when she took a bite of the croissant and discovered the filling. Okay, this might actually be the best one yet, Grace admitted.
See?
I do know things, Ava said, bumping her shoulder playfully. Still mysterious, though.
Still vague.
You realize that, right? Ava exhaled. I know. It's complicated. Life usually is. But I'm not asking for your bank statements. Just honesty. Eventually, Ava looked down at her hands. She hated this, being seen and still hiding. Grace placed a hand over Ava's. I'm not pushing. I just like you. A lot. And I don't want to fall for a version of you that isn't real. The words hit Ava harder than she expected. Fall for. It wasn't casual anymore. It wasn't light. There was gravity now. You're not, Ava said quietly. You're seeing more of me than most people ever do. Then keep letting me, Grace whispered. Their eyes locked, and Ava moved before she could stop herself. She leaned in, slow and deliberate, giving Grace every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met softly at first, tentative and careful, like a question neither of them had dared to ask. But then it deepened. Grace's hand slid into Ava's hair, and Ava cupped her jaw, pulling her closer, everything else disappearing.
The park.
The cold.
The lie.
All gone. Just this. Just them. When they finally pulled back, Grace was breathless.
Well.
That's one way to silence a girl. Ava smiled against her lips. Worked, didn't it? Grace laughed, but it was softer now, more vulnerable. I don't know what this is yet, but it feels like it could be something. Something real. Ava rested her forehead against Grace's. It scares the hell out of me how real it feels. Grace took her hand again, weaving their fingers together. Then let's be scared together. They spent the rest of the morning walking, talking, brushing hands. Ava felt herself sinking deeper with every look, every laugh.
She wanted to stop time.
Wanted to freeze this moment before everything shattered.
Because it would.
She was sure of it. That night, back in her penthouse, she opened her laptop to a flurry of emails. Mergers. Press leaks. Questions from the board. Her real life clawing at her like it always did. She ignored it. She opened a blank document instead and started typing. Not business. Not legal strategy. But the truth. The whole truth. She didn't know if she'd ever send it to Grace. But part of her needed to see it written. Needed to admit that she was falling in love with someone who only knew half of her. Days passed. They kept texting.
Talking.
Meeting up. Always in public. Always casual. Always Ava in borrowed clothes, in borrowed time, trying to pretend this could last. One night, Grace invited her over. Pizza and terrible movies, she promised. Ava brought wine. They sat on the floor, Ava in sweatpants for the first time in her adult life, and Grace curled against her side like it was the most natural thing in the world. They kissed between scenes. Laughed until their sides hurt. And then, when the credits rolled, Grace turned off the TV and looked at Ava seriously. Stay. Ava's heart stopped. Grace, just stay. No pressure. I don't want a night to end. Ava should have said no. She should have pulled back. But instead, she nodded. And when Grace led her to the bedroom, and they lay tangled in soft sheets and quiet breaths, Ava felt something she hadn't in years.
Peace.
The kind that comes with being exactly where you're meant to be. She fell asleep with Grace's hand resting over her heart. In the dark, Ava whispered, too quietly to be heard, I'm not who you think I am. But Grace didn't stir. She just held her tighter. The sound of birds outside the window was the first thing Ava registered when she woke up. The second was the warmth of Grace's body curled tightly against her. And the third was the way her heart ached, not from discomfort, but from how violently she wanted this to be real. Not borrowed. Not borrowed clothes, borrowed time, borrowed identity.
Real.
Grace shifted in her sleep, her arm tightening around Ava's waist like her body knew something her mind hadn't yet caught up to. Ava could have stayed like that forever. But reality didn't care about what she wanted. Reality was the stack of emails waiting in her inbox, the press embargo about to drop on the new merger, and the silent lies stretching longer between them every day she didn't confess. She slipped out of bed carefully, making sure not to wake Grace. She moved quietly through the tiny apartment, noting the framed pictures on the shelves, Grace and her sister, Grace and the kids from her nonprofit, Grace at some protest holding a cardboard sign that said people over profit. Ava smiled at that. Of course. Of course Grace would fight for the world with her whole chest. Ava had no idea what Grace would do if she knew the truth, that the woman she'd let into her home, her life, her bed, was the face behind one of the most aggressively capitalist empires in the country. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the window. The city was still hazy, barely waking. And so was she, in the kind of days that only came with sleeping beside someone who made you feel like you could breathe for the first time. You trying to sneak out on me? Grace's voice was raspy with sleep, soft and amused. Ava turned, heart skipping. Grace stood in the doorway wearing nothing but one of Ava's t-shirts and a smirk that made her knees weak. No, Ava said. Just thinking. Dangerous. Grace patted over and wrapped her arms around Ava from behind, resting her chin on her shoulder. Come back to bed. It's Sunday. The world can wait. Ava wished it could. She leaned into Grace's warmth, letting herself have that moment, but the ache in her chest only grew stronger. Can I take you somewhere tonight? Ava asked suddenly. Grace blinked. Like a date?
Yes.
But not coffee. Something nicer. Dress up. I don't know. Do it right. Grace looked surprised. That sounds a little fancy for the mysterious consultant who lives in hoodies. Ava smiled. Maybe I'm full of surprises. Grace studied her. Okay. I'm intrigued. Where are we going? It's a surprise. Just trust me. Grace hesitated, then nodded.
All right.
I'll wear heels. Don't make me regret it. That evening, Ava waited outside Grace's building in a borrowed car. Not her usual driver. Not the Maybach. Just a sleek, rented Audi she could return without questions. She wore a tailored black suit that hugged her body in all the right ways, but had no visible designer labels. Just enough to hint at elegance without tipping into suspicion. When Grace stepped outside, Ava's breath caught. She wore a deep green dress, her hair pinned back, her lips painted red. She looked like Ava's undoing. Wow, Ava said. You clean up okay. Grace rolled her eyes, laughing as she climbed into the car. You look dangerous. Maybe I am. God, I hope so. They drove to a rooftop restaurant with a view of the skyline. Not one of the spots Ava usually reserved for board meetings or client dinners. This one was private, intimate, hidden. She'd used her assistant's name on the reservation to avoid recognition. As they stepped out, Grace looked around, impressed. You really went all out. Ava took her hand. You deserve all out. They were led to a corner table with candles and soft jazz humming in the background. Grace stared at her across the table, eyes warm and curious. Okay, what's going on with you? What do you mean? You've been different today. Quiet. Thoughtful. You're always a little guarded, but tonight it feels like something's spinning in your head. Ava hesitated. Her thumb traced the rim of her glass. There's something I want to tell you, but I'm scared it'll ruin everything. Grace's smile faded slightly. That's serious? Ava nodded. I didn't expect to meet you.
I didn't expect to feel like this.
And now it's complicated. Grace reached across the table and took her hand.
Ava.
Whatever it is, I'd rather know than be lied to. I've had enough of people hiding things.
Please.
Just tell me. Ava opened her mouth. The truth was right there, pressing at her lips. But then her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Grace raised an eyebrow. You can answer it if you need to. Ava checked the screen. 5 messages. 1 from her head of PR. 2 from board members. 1 from her sister. And 1 from her assistant. Her stomach dropped as she read them. Ava, need to prepare a statement ASAP. The more tech leak just went public. The stories everywhere. Your name, your dating profile, your personal info. It's all out. Grace's too. Damage control in motion. But it's bad. Ava's throat went dry. Grace watched her, confused. What's wrong? Ava looked up, eyes wide with panic. We have to go. What?
Now.
I'll explain in the car. Please, Grace, just trust me. Ava threw cash on the table and pulled Grace up, guiding her out as people in the restaurant started murmuring, glancing at their phones, looking at her like they knew her. Grace was asking questions, but Ava couldn't hear. Her heart thundered as she opened the car door and practically shoved Grace inside. She got in beside her, locked the doors, and started driving. Ava, what the hell is going on? Grace demanded, voice rising. Ava stared at the road. I lied to you. About everything. And now, it's all coming out. Grace's silence was louder than any scream. Ava kept driving, gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles turned white, knowing the one thing she never wanted to happen was already in motion. And Grace might never forgive her. The silence in the car was suffocating. Ava could hear her own breath, too fast, too shallow, and the occasional ping of her phone as more messages poured in, each one tightening the noose she'd tied around herself. Grace sat rigid in the passenger seat, arms crossed, eyes forward, lips pressed into a line so tight it looked carved from stone. She hadn't said a single word since Ava confessed. Not a question, not a scream, not even a curse, just silence. And Ava, who was used to controlling rooms full of ruthless men in tailored suits, had never felt so helpless in her life. I'm taking us somewhere private, Ava said finally, her voice hoarse. No one will follow us there. We can talk. I owe you. You owe me the truth, Grace cut in coldly. Something you should have given me before this turned into a circus. Ava winced. I know.
Do you?
Because it doesn't feel like you do. Ava turned the wheel, taking a sharp right into an underground parking garage, the one beneath her private building downtown. She swiped her card, drove into her personal spot, discreet, gated, secure, and parked. Come upstairs with me, she said quietly. I'll explain everything. Grace stared at her. Explain it here. Ava closed her eyes, then forced herself to meet Grace's gaze. My name is Ava Moore. I'm not a consultant. I'm the CEO of Moretech. It's a multinational tech firm. I inherited it when I was 25 after my father died. I've been running it for 10 years. I didn't tell you because I've been used, judged, manipulated, and wanted for everything except who I really am. I didn't want that to happen with you. Grace blinked slowly. So instead, you lied. Let me fall for a version of you that doesn't exist. No, yes. Her voice cracked. You let me fall for you, knowing it was built on a lie. Ava opened her door and stepped out. Please, just come upstairs. Let me show you. Not just the money, not the power.
Me.
For a moment, she thought Grace would say no. But something in her face shifted. Not forgiveness, but maybe the desperate need for clarity. 15 minutes, she said sharply. That's all you get. Ava nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The penthouse was nothing like Grace had imagined. She wasn't sure what she'd pictured. Sterile luxury, maybe, all chrome and glass and coldness. But Ava's space was surprisingly warm. Art on the walls. Shelves filled with actual books. A grand piano near the windows. Soft lighting. A fire flickering in the corner. It felt lived in.
Real.
But Grace didn't let herself be impressed. She stood near the doorway, arms still crossed. Start talking. Ava stood by the kitchen island, eyes tired. When my sister set up the dating profile for me, she made me swear not to lead with money. I took it further. I made a whole new profile. Different job, different wardrobe, different life. I wanted to meet someone who saw me first. Not the company. Not the fortune. Not the name. Grace's laugh was bitter. You wanted someone to fall in love with your soul, not your bank account. Cute. It wasn't supposed to go this far. So what? You were going to ghost me after a few fun dates?
No.
I don't know. Maybe at first. But then I met you. And everything changed. Ava's voice cracked on that last word, and she hated how it made her sound.
Weak.
Grace finally moved, pacing slowly through the living room, taking everything in. You told me you didn't cook because you liked control. That wasn't a joke, was it? No, every time I asked about your past, you deflected. Every time I got too close, you changed the subject. Because I was terrified you'd look at me the way everyone else does. And now? Grace turned to her, eyes burning. What do you see when you look at me? Some project? A good-hearted charity worker to balance your ruthless empire? Stop it. Ava stepped forward, raw emotion in every word. I see the first person who made me laugh without thinking, who looked at me like I was enough, not because of what I owned, but because of who I was when I let my guard down. I fell for you, Grace. And that scared the hell out of me. Grace shook her head. You don't get to say that. Not when everything you showed me was a curated performance. Ava walked over, slowly, and placed a trembling hand over her own chest. This, what I feel for you, is the most honest thing I've ever known. Grace swallowed hard. She looked torn, devastated, furious, and something else, something that looked like it hurt to hold back. You slept in my bed. You kissed me like I was your first breath after drowning. And the whole time, you were lying to me. Yes, Ava whispered. But it didn't make anything I felt less real. Grace stood there, shaking her head, and Ava stepped closer. Close enough to feel the tension in her shoulders. Say something. Please. Grace looked up at her, and the tears in her eyes were like knives. I don't know who you are. I'll show you, Ava begged. I'll give you everything. My past, my fears, my shame, my name. Just don't walk away from this yet. Grace's face crumpled. I need time. Ava froze. Time to think,
To feel. To breathe.
because right now, all I can hear is the echo of your lie. She turned and walked to the door. If this was real for you, really real, then you'll let me go. And you'll wait. Ava didn't move. Couldn't. She just watched Grace disappear down the hallway, each footstep a gunshot to her chest. The door clicked shut behind her, and Ava, for the first time in a long time, felt completely alone in her own empire. Ava didn't leave the apartment for 4 days. Not because of the press. Her PR team handled the chaos with ruthless precision, spinning the narrative just enough to maintain investor confidence while deflecting personal questions. Not because of work. Her COO stepped in with authority, knowing better than to ask why Ava suddenly went silent. No, Ava stayed inside because nothing outside mattered. Not when Grace wasn't speaking to her. Not when every breath felt like it caught in her throat. The world could wait. For the first time in her life, Ava Moore let everything else burn so she could sit in her penthouse with only her guilt and the ghost of a woman who hadn't judged her until she had to. Grace hadn't responded to any of her messages. Not the long, aching one Ava sent the first night, filled with all the truth she should have said sooner. Not the second one, just 2 words. I'm sorry. Not the third, which she deleted after typing it and stared at the blinking cursor for an hour. She didn't want to smother Grace. She didn't want to push. But the silence was torture. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped, only to plummet when it wasn't Grace. She tried to work.
Failed.
She tried to sleep.
Failed.
She tried to eat. Barely succeeded. In her weakest moment, she sat at the grand piano, fingers trembling as she played a quiet melody that echoed through the empty apartment like a confession. A song with no lyrics. No answers. Just longing. Grace didn't turn on the TV. She avoided social media. She didn't need headlines to remind her what Ava Moore looked like in a boardroom. She'd seen her already. Up close, in the dark, in the light, in bed, in her kitchen, in her arms. That was the part she couldn't escape. She didn't miss the company. She missed her. The way Ava's laugh had surprised her every time. The way she touched her like she was made of glass, but kissed her like she was the air she needed to breathe. She missed the version of Ava she'd met, the stripped-down, sarcastic, slightly awkward woman who brought croissants and judged people in the park with her. And she hated herself for missing someone who had built their connection on a lie. But was it a lie? Or was it self-protection? Grace didn't know anymore. She hated the press for making her feel like a prop in someone else's story. She hated herself for wondering if Ava had really meant everything she said. And most of all, she hated how much she still wanted to hear her voice. Her sister noticed it first. "You're quiet," she said one morning, passing Grace a cup of coffee. "That's not like you." "I'm just tired." Of the news or of the woman? Grace flinched. Both. Her sister sat beside her. "You told me she made you feel seen, that she looked at you like you mattered." "She did." "And you think that was fake?" Grace shook her head.
No.
"That's the worst part." "I know it wasn't." "Then what's stopping you from talking to her?" Grace looked down at her coffee, voice small. "I don't know if I can trust her again." "That's fair." A pause. "But maybe if what you had was real, then that conversation deserves more than silence." Grace didn't reply, but the words stayed with her all day. The next morning, Ava sat at her piano again. She hadn't touched it since the night Grace left, but today her fingers moved automatically, her body aching with a need to create something, anything, that wasn't pain. That's when the knock came.
Soft.
Hesitant. She froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. The staff had the day off. Security never buzzed someone up without telling her, unless... Her heart stuttered. She stood slowly, legs weak beneath her, and walked to the door. When she opened it, Grace stood there. Hair down. No makeup. Just a hoodie and jeans and eyes that made Ava's chest cave in. "Hi," Grace said. Ava swallowed hard. "Hi. I wasn't sure if I should come." Ava's voice was a whisper. "I wasn't sure if I could survive it if you didn't." Grace looked away, then back. "I'm not here to forgive everything. I'm not even sure I'm ready to talk about us." But I couldn't ignore what I felt. Ava nodded slowly, her throat tight. "You don't have to say anything. Just come in. Be here." Grace stepped inside. The door closed behind her, sealing them in the quiet that used to be comforting but now felt fragile. She looked around slowly, taking in the space again. "You play piano?" "Only when I'm falling apart." Grace let out a soft laugh.
Well,
"That's relatable." Ava moved carefully toward her. "I don't expect anything, Grace. Not forgiveness. Not a clean slate. I just wanted you to know that I meant every word. Every moment with you is real. I just didn't have the courage to be real first." Grace's eyes shimmered. "I know." Silence.
thick.
Tangled. Ava stepped even closer. Not touching. Not daring. "Do you want to sit? Talk? Yell?" "Maybe all of it," Grace said quietly. "But not yet." Ava nodded. Grace studied her. "You look like hell." "I feel worse."
Good.
And then, finally, Grace stepped into her arms. Ava exhaled like she hadn't breathed in days, wrapping her arms around her tightly, clutching her like she'd never let go again. She buried her face in Grace's shoulder, and Grace held her like someone who wasn't ready to let herself fall, but needed to feel the ground again. No words, no promises. Just warmth. Just proximity. Just hope. The door hadn't closed completely behind them, and the world was still out there, waiting. But in that moment, for the first time since everything shattered, Ava didn't feel broken. She felt seen. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the start of something that could survive the truth. They didn't talk much that night. Grace didn't stay. She left before the sun dipped completely below the skyline, just as the city lights began blinking awake outside Ava's windows. But her presence lingered like a second heartbeat in the room, loud and undeniable. Ava watched the door long after it closed, her skin still warm where Grace had held her, her body aching with everything she hadn't said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. But it was something. A crack in the ice. And for Ava, that was enough to hope again. She didn't push. She didn't text. She didn't call. Not for 3 days. Instead, she waited. She focused on work for the first time since the leak, burying herself in numbers, contracts, strategies, everything that used to distract her so easily. But now, even billion-dollar deals felt dull. Every room she entered was full of people who smiled because they had to, who flattered her because of who she was on paper. None of it mattered. None of them were Grace. On the 4th night, just as Ava was locking her phone screen after reading an old message Grace had sent weeks ago, "You feel like a secret I actually want to keep," her intercom buzzed. Her chest seized. She ran barefoot to the door. Grace stood there again. No warning. No hesitation. This time she was holding 2 takeout bags. "Ty," she said, her voice casual, like they hadn't been swimming in heartbreak a few days ago. "And yes, I remembered your insane spice tolerance." Ava stared. "Is this a dream?" Grace stepped inside. "If it is, you're severely underdressed for it." Ava looked down at the worn t-shirt and shorts she'd thrown on.
Right.
"I would have gone for lingerie if I knew I'd be hallucinating you." "Don't test me," Grace said, setting the food on the counter. "I brought extra curry." "God, I missed you." Ava hadn't meant to say it.
Not like that.
Grace paused, her back to her. She slowly turned around. "Yeah," she said softly. "I missed you too." They ate on the couch with their legs tucked under them, trading bites and sarcastic comments, slipping into the kind of comfort that usually takes years to build. Grace asked about the fallout from the leak. Ava told her about the press frenzy, the board's panic, her decision to issue a single statement, no comment. "My personal life is not up for discussion." Grace raised an eyebrow. "That's bold." "I learned it from someone," Ava said, her eyes fixed on her. Someone who doesn't apologize for living honestly. Grace looked away, her expression unreadable. You could have told me the truth earlier. I know. Why didn't you? Ava set her container down, fingers tightening slightly. Because I'm terrified of being loved for the wrong reasons. And because the last time I let someone in, they took what they wanted and used it to destroy me. I couldn't tell if what we had was real until it was too real to risk. And now, Ava met her eyes. Now, I'd burn everything I have just to keep one more hour with you. The words sat between them, heavy and true. Grace didn't speak for a moment. Then she leaned back against the couch, exhaling. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. You built a whole life where no one really knows you. And you built one where everyone expects you to carry their pain. Grace flinched slightly. Ava softened her voice. I don't want to add to that. I just want to be someone you can lean on, too. Grace looked at her, and something in her eyes flickered. Vulnerability, maybe, or the sharp edge of desire mixed with fear. You can't fix this in one dinner. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to earn it. Grace studied her, then slowly reached over and took Ava's hand. Then you need to stop pretending you're not still scared. Ava laced their fingers together. I am. But I'm more scared of not trying. They sat like that for a long time. Eventually, Grace shifted closer, resting her head on Ava's shoulder. I'm not ready to forgive everything, she murmured. I know, but I don't want to stay away anymore. Ava closed her eyes, overwhelmed with quiet gratitude. Then stay. Not tonight. Ava nodded. Tomorrow? Grace kissed her cheek. Maybe. The next day, Grace texted, Come see where I work. No assistants. No makeup. Just you. Ava didn't hesitate. She showed up in jeans, sneakers, and a plain white tee. No driver. No car service. No pretense. Just her. Grace met her at the front desk of the community center, wearing a simple denim jacket and her hair tied back. You clean up okay? Ava said, teasing. Wait until you see me yell at teenagers. The day was chaos. Ava helped unload donations, organize boxes of clothes, talk to volunteers, even fold pamphlets about programs for at-risk youth. She saw Grace in her element, strong, commanding, warm, a natural leader. Every time someone looked at her with gratitude, pride, affection, Ava felt her heart stretch a little more. By the end of the day, she was exhausted, sweaty, and the happiest she'd felt in weeks. Grace walked her out. You didn't complain once. I'm still pretending I'm not sore. Grace smirked. You were watching me the whole time. Was it that obvious? Like, painfully. Ava stepped closer. I can't stop. Then don't. And just like that, Grace kissed her again.
Quick. Soft. Real.
Not like the first kiss. Not like the goodbye. But something in between. A new beginning. Ava stood there stunned. Grace walked away, without looking back. And Ava knew, deep in her bones, that something had shifted. Something was being rebuilt, slowly, brick by brick. And this time, Ava wasn't hiding. This time, she'd show Grace everything. The truth. The mess. The fear. The love. All of it. The third time Grace kissed her, Ava didn't hold back. Not with her breath, not with her hands, and especially not with the quiet, aching hunger she'd been trying to tame since the first time they met. She pulled Grace in with one hand at the back of her neck, the other at her waist, holding her like she was something precious, but also like she'd been waiting to fall apart in her arms for weeks. The kiss started soft, tentative, Grace testing, Ava surrendering, but it deepened quickly until neither of them could remember why they were trying to take it slow in the first place. When they finally parted, breathless, Grace's eyes searched hers with something wild and cautious all at once. Tell me this isn't just adrenaline, she whispered. Ava shook her head, her thumb tracing the curve of Grace's cheek. It's you. Always you. That night, they didn't go home together. Not because they didn't want to, but because they both needed to feel the weight of what they were choosing. This wasn't the chase anymore. This was the beginning of trust being rebuilt, moment by moment, kiss by kiss, hour by hour. Ava respected that. Craved it. Even as she drove home with her lips still tasting like Grace, and her skin still humming from the way Grace had gripped the back of her jacket. The next 2 weeks unfolded like the slow turn of a page Ava didn't want to rush. Grace started letting her in again, quietly, carefully. They didn't talk about the past every time they met. Sometimes they just ate dinner on the floor. Sometimes they played cards in the park. Sometimes they sat in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching the world pass them by. And that silence wasn't empty. It was healing. There were hard moments, too. Moments when Grace would pull away slightly, needing space. When she'd go quiet if Ava mentioned her family or wealth too casually. But every time, Ava noticed. And every time, she slowed down, met Grace where she was, and reminded her, with actions, not just words, that she wasn't hiding anymore. One night, after Ava helped Grace set up for a fundraiser at the center, they walked home side by side. "I'm nervous about this," Grace said suddenly, her voice low. "About us." "I know," Ava said. "So am I." "You're never nervous. You walk into buildings that carry your name like they belong to you." "I never walked into you." Grace looked at her. "That's a dangerous line." "It's a dangerous feeling." Grace stopped walking. Ava did too. "Then say it," Grace whispered. "Say what you feel when you look at me." Ava stepped closer, so close their bodies brushed, and she didn't look away. "I feel like I want to be better. Like I want to stop hiding. Like I want to tear the world down just to rebuild it around you." Grace's breath caught. "That's a lot, Ava." "I know. I've never done a little of anything in my life." Grace let out a breathy, almost disbelieving laugh. "God help me. I like you so much it's actually infuriating." Ava smiled.
Good.
"I'd hate to be forgettable." That night, Grace came home with her. The door barely closed before Ava had her pressed against it. Their mouths crashed together with the kind of urgency that came from weeks of holding back. Ava's hands were in Grace's hair, on her hips, her waist, her spine, pulling her closer, grounding herself in the feel of her. Grace responded with equal fire, her fingers slipping under Ava's shirt, trailing along her stomach, nails lightly scraping. "Bedroom," Grace murmured against her lips.
Now.
Ava didn't argue. She led her there, stumbling over furniture, laughter between kisses, need between breath. The moment Grace pushed her down on the bed, Ava surrendered everything. Her control, her rhythm, her fear. She let Grace undress her slowly, reverently, like she was something worth worshipping. Not because of what she owned, but because of who she was beneath it all. And when Ava pulled Grace onto the bed, when she kissed every inch of her like she'd memorized it in another lifetime, when she whispered her name over and over like a prayer, it wasn't about proving anything. It was about being seen, being chosen, being known. After, they lay tangled in each other's arms, skin damp, limbs heavy, hearts thudding like matching drums. Ava couldn't stop touching her, gentle brushes of her fingers over Grace's arm, her shoulder, the line of her jaw. Grace's head rested on Ava's chest, one leg draped over hers, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Grace broke the silence. That was not casual. Ava's voice was soft, raw. It was everything but casual. Grace lifted her head. "I'm still scared. So am I. But I don't want to run anymore." Ava tucked a curl behind Grace's ear. "Then don't. I'm not going anywhere." Grace kissed her again, slow and deep, and something shifted in the room, an unspoken understanding that whatever this was, it was real now.
Messy.
Complicated. Intense. But real. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, the city lights flickering through the window, casting soft gold across their skin. For the first time since their world had exploded, they weren't pretending. Not about names. Not about fears. And definitely not about love. Ava woke first. The light filtering through the curtains was soft, gray, early. Grace was still wrapped around her, one leg between hers, one arm sprawled over Ava's stomach, face buried in the crook of her neck. She was warm and real and breathtakingly close, and for a moment, Ava didn't move. Couldn't. Because waking up to Grace, feeling her body breathe in sync with hers, felt like everything Ava had never let herself want. She reached out slowly, brushing her fingers through Grace's curls, memorizing the way they curled around her knuckles. And then Grace stirred. Her lips grazed Ava's skin as she yawned against her shoulder. Are you watching me sleep? That's creepy more. No, Ava said softly, smiling. I'm appreciating the miracle of not waking up alone. Grace laughed quietly. Well, the miracle is mutual. They lay there a little longer, letting silence fill in what their bodies already knew. But eventually, reality began to tap at the edges of the morning. Phones buzzing, responsibilities creeping in, the world reminding them it still existed. Ava kissed Grace's shoulder. I have to be at a board meeting in 2 hours. Yikes. I have 3 back-to-back meetings and a grant application due. Can we cancel life? Tempting, Grace murmured. But if we're building an empire of emotional stability and mutual adoration, we probably need income. Ava groaned.
Fine.
But I'm kidnapping you this weekend. Non-negotiable. Do I get a ransom note? You'll get a silk robe and breakfast in bed. That's my version of ransom. Grace smirked. I'm listening. That afternoon, Ava returned to her office for the first time in weeks. The moment she stepped into the glass tower, everything hit her at once. The pace, the power, the way people looked at her. But something had shifted. She didn't feel untouchable anymore.
She didn't want to.
Her assistant, Kara, gave her a pointed look. You're glowing. Did you buy another company or get laid? Both, Ava replied dryly. Kara blinked. Wait, you're serious? Ava ignored the question. Any disasters? Nothing you can't charm your way out of. But there was tension in the air. Ava could feel it the second she stepped into the boardroom. The PR scandal was over, but some of the investors were still shaken by the personal exposure. We're not questioning your leadership, Ava, one of them said, but perhaps you could be more selective with public relationships moving forward. Ava's gaze sharpened. Grace is not a scandal. And if this company ever asks me to apologize for loving someone genuine, you'll find my resignation letter on your desk before the coffee gets cold. Silence. Then, slowly, another board member, a woman Ava had once mentored, nodded. Understood. And just like that, the meeting moved on. Ava's hands trembled under the table, but she didn't let it show. For the first time in her career, she had stood up for her personal life without shame. And it felt right. That night, Grace came over again. She brought wine. Ava cooked. It was laughably bad. Grace teased her mercilessly, but they ended up eating half-burnt pasta while sitting on the kitchen floor in their socks, giggling like teenagers. You know you're ruining my standards for romance forever, right? Grace said, nudging her. All my future dates are going to feel like budget imitations of you. Ava tilted her head. Future dates, huh? I mean, hypothetical. You planning to leave me already? Grace's face softened.
No.
I'm not planning anything, honestly. I'm just trying to be here.
Present.
With you. Ava leaned in, kissing her gently. That's all I want. Later, after they moved to the couch, Ava traced lazy circles on Grace's thigh. Do you think this could work? Grace looked up at her. It is working. I mean long-term. With the pressure. The attention. My life. Your work. All of it. Grace didn't answer right away. I think we'll have to keep choosing it. Over and over. Even when it's hard. I can do that. Can you let me in when it's messy? Can you stay when I'm scared? They looked at each other. The answer was yes, even if they didn't say it. Grace reached for Ava's hand and squeezed it. You don't have to prove anything to me. Ava blinked. I always feel like I do. Well, stop. You already have. That weekend, Ava flew them to a quiet coastal town. Nothing flashy, no paparazzi. Just an old cottage she secretly owned under a different name. They walked barefoot on the beach, shared secret jokes, watched movies under blankets, and kissed like they had nowhere else to be. On their last night there, Ava couldn't sleep. She stood outside on the porch, watching the moonlight shimmer on the water. Grace came up behind her, slipping her arms around Ava's waist.
Hey.
You okay?
Yeah.
Just overwhelmed. In a good way. That's allowed. I used to think I had to earn everything. Fight for it. Own it. Win it. But this? Ava turned, resting her forehead against Grace's. You? Grace smiled. You don't have to fight for me. You just have to let me stay. Ava kissed her like a promise. Deep, slow, infinite. The ocean roared in the distance. And somewhere inside her, a wall crumbled for the last time. Because this love wasn't built on power or performance. It was built on truth. And for once in her life, Ava Moore finally felt free. They returned to the city on a Monday morning painted in gold. The sun rose behind them as the jet landed, Ava's fingers still interlaced with Grace's, her heart beating steadier than it had in weeks. The air between them was quiet but full, like the silence after a truth has been spoken, like a room after a fire has been put out. They didn't need to say it. They were together now. And they both knew what that meant. It meant vulnerability. It meant presence. It meant choosing each other every damn day. Back in the city, the rhythm picked up again. Ava went back to boardrooms and headlines, and Grace returned to her world of underfunded programs, overworked staff, and the relentless fight for dignity in a system that rarely offered it. But they made space. Late-night dinners, sleepovers, lunches snuck between meetings, kisses exchanged in doorways, and more than anything, truth. Honest conversations. Even when they hurt. Even when Ava's instinct was to shut down. Even when Grace's fear of being sidelined whispered that this couldn't last. They kept talking. Kept reaching. Until one night something cracked. Ava was late. Not 10 minutes late. An hour late. Grace sat at the restaurant, her phone face up on the table, untouched glass of wine in front of her, heart thudding faster with every minute. She tried not to assume the worst, tried not to let the old voice creep in, the one that said of course she forgot, of course she's too busy for you, of course it wasn't real. But by the time Ava finally arrived, flushed and breathless and visibly unraveling, Grace was already half out the door. "Grace, wait," Ava said, catching her by the arm. "I'm sorry. The board meeting ran late, and then there was a call about a breach in security and you didn't text," Grace snapped. Ava blinked. "I didn't think." "That's the problem," Grace said. "You didn't think about me. Not even a one-line text. I was under pressure. It wasn't personal. It feels personal when I'm sitting there alone while everyone in the restaurant starts recognizing me from your scandal and whispering about why I'm alone again." Ava's stomach dropped. "God, Grace, I'm so sorry. That wasn't what I know it wasn't," Grace cut in softer now. "But if we're doing this, really doing this, you can't disappear into your world and forget I exist whenever it gets hard." Ava stepped back, ashamed. "I'm still learning. This isn't easy for me." "I don't want easy," Grace said. "I want real. I want the same version of you I had in that cottage, barefoot, honest, present. Not this curated version who belongs to the world first and me second." Ava opened her mouth, then closed it. Grace watched her. "Can you give me that version of you, Ava? Even when things go to hell?" Ava reached for her hand. "I can try. I'll fail sometimes. But I won't stop trying." Grace hesitated, then squeezed her hand once. "Okay, but I need to see it." The next day, Ava canceled a press conference. Just canceled it. Told her team the company could survive one day without her smile and a blazer. She showed up at Grace's community center unannounced, dressed down, hair tied back, no security. Just Ava. She spent the whole day helping with intake forms, delivering care packages, even folding chairs after a group therapy session. No cameras. No statements. Just her. Grace saw it. All of it. And that night, she kissed Ava on the steps of the center, in full view of the volunteers and clients and the city. Not out of performance. Out of certainty. But of course, peace never lasted long. Especially not when you were dating a woman whose life was public property. The media had cooled until a new op-ed went viral. A hit piece. Personal.
Cruel.
An anonymous source claiming Ava was using a noble woman for redemption points after the scandal. It dissected Grace's nonprofit work, implied she was naive, a social climber. The headline, Sleeping with Power, the Charity Girlfriend Fairy Tale. Grace found it first. She didn't tell Ava. She didn't have to. Ava's phone started lighting up with board alerts, media flags, text after text. And then one from Kara. She's not answering her phone.
Go to her now.
Ava did. No driver. No car. She ran. Grace's apartment door was unlocked. She found her on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, face blank. Grace. Grace looked up. So I'm a charity case now. Guess the fairy tale got boring. That article is trash, Ava said immediately, crossing the room. You know that. It doesn't matter what I know. Her voice cracked. It's what the world sees. Ava kneeled in front of her. Let them look. Let them write. You're not theirs. You're mine. And I'm yours. They don't get to touch that. Grace shook her head, tears slipping silently. This is the part one was scared of. The part where I'm a name on your press sheet. A scandal in heels. Ava grabbed her hands. Then let's fight back. Not with a press release. With truth. Come with me tomorrow. To the gala. Walk in with me.
Stand next to me.
Let them see. Grace hesitated. You want to put me in the middle of it? You're already in the middle of my life. I'm not hiding you. Not anymore. Silence. Then Grace nodded.
Fine.
But I'm not wearing heels. Ava smiled through a breathless, aching chest. Flats look better on you anyway. The gala was everything Grace had feared and Ava had prepared for. Sharp lights, sharper glances, a room filled with luxury and judgment dressed in custom-tailored gowns and handcrafted smiles. It was held at a museum uptown, transformed into a cathedral of wealth for the evening. Champagne towers, crystal chandeliers, string quartets echoing off marble walls. Ava had been to 1,000 events like it, but never like this. Never with Grace. She had never been more aware of a woman's presence beside her. And not because of how Grace looked, though she looked incredible, wearing a sleek black jumpsuit that hugged her curves and flats that made a silent statement louder than any diamond ever could, but because of what she meant. Ava had never brought anyone to an event like this. Not as a partner. Not as someone real. And certainly not as someone the world had already tried to tear apart. As they stepped out of the car, a wave of flashbulbs exploded. Ava immediately reached for Grace's hand. You good? She asked under her breath. Grace gave a tight smile.
No.
But let's do it anyway. Cameras snapped like gunfire. Voices shouted.
Ava.
Over here. Grace, are you in love? Are the rumors true? Is this just PR cleanup? Ava ignored them. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. She walked forward with Grace's hand firmly in hers, chin high, eyes forward. And Grace, nervous, tense, but holding her ground, walked right beside her. Inside, the atmosphere didn't soften. If anything, it sharpened. Eyes followed them. Whispers trailed behind them. Ava could feel the speculation hanging in the air like perfume. Grace stiffened slightly, and Ava leaned closer. I swear, if one more woman stares at you like you don't belong here, I'm buying this building just to kick her out. Please don't, Grace whispered back. That would be an extremely aggressive love language. I'm an aggressive woman. No kidding. They reached their table, a round one near the center of the room. Impossible to miss. Ava's seat was next to the mayor. Grace's was next to a media executive Ava had sued 3 years ago. She gave Ava a look that could curdle champagne. Lovely of you to join us, Ms. Moore, she said. And this must be the famous charity girlfriend. How charming. Grace blinked, but didn't shrink. Hi, I'm Grace. I work in housing equity, and I don't bite unless provoked. Ava barely suppressed a grin. The rest of the night passed in waves. Some people were warm. Some were fake. Some were downright cruel. Ava watched Grace navigate all of it with quiet dignity and biting wit, and felt her chest swell with something dangerously close to awe. During the auction portion of the night, Ava leaned over and whispered, "Are you bored yet? I'm considering setting off the fire alarm just to escape. You know I'd fund an entire youth program in your name if you did." Grace smiled, then tilted her head. "You'd do that anyway."
Yes.
But the alarm would be a lot sexier. Ava didn't care about the auction, or the speeches, or the board members still unsure how to read her after the scandal. She only cared about one thing: her. Near the end of the night, Ava slipped her hand onto Grace's thigh beneath the table. Just a touch. Just presence. Grace looked at her, and for a long moment, Ava saw it. The fear still lingering, the hesitation, but also the trust. And the spark. "Come with me," Ava whispered. "Where?" "Somewhere without cameras." Grace followed her through the hallway, down past staff-only doors, into a quiet corner gallery. Empty.
Dark.
Quiet. Paintings watched them from the walls, pieces worth millions, but Ava only had eyes for her. Grace turned toward her. "We're going to get kicked out of a gala full of billionaires." So, Grace murmured, "Kiss me before I lose my nerve." Ava didn't wait. She pressed Grace against the wall, one hand cupping her jaw, the other at her waist. The kiss was urgent, breathless, not sweet, desperate. A reclaiming. A promise. A fuck you to every headline that had tried to reduce Grace to a footnote. When they finally pulled back, Grace was panting. "That was bold." "You think I care what any of them say about you?" Ava said. "They don't get to define you. You're the bravest person in this building. And you're the one risking everything just to stand beside me." Ava brushed a thumb along her cheek. "It's not a risk. It's the most certain thing I've ever done. Even with the fallout?" "Especially with the fallout." Grace stared at her for a long moment.
Then, okay.
"I'm in." "In what?"
This. Us.
"All of it." Ava's smile was slow, wide, and devastating. "Say it again." "I'm in." She kissed her again, softer this time, but deeper. When they emerged from the hallway 20 minutes later, slightly flushed and barely composed, Ava didn't care who noticed. She pulled Grace close as they stepped back into the ballroom and said, loud enough for anyone listening, "You're coming home with me tonight." Grace arched a brow. "Your place or mine?" Ava smirked. "I want to ruin you in my own bed." Grace's eyes went dark with heat. "Then what the hell are we still doing here?" Ava didn't sleep that night. Not because of the sex, though yes, it had been slow, intense, whispered, and left her breathless in ways no luxury ever had. Not because of the adrenaline of having Grace beside her, curled into her chest like she belonged there. No, Ava didn't sleep because for the first time since they met, everything felt stable. And that terrified her more than any lie she'd ever told. Because Ava Moore didn't believe in stability. Not really. It was always conditional. Conditional on power, on control, on performance. And this thing with Grace wasn't built on any of those. It was built on truth, vulnerability,
choice.
Which meant if she lost it, there would be nothing left to hide behind. She stared at the ceiling for hours, arm around Grace's waist, listening to her soft, steady breaths. And as the sun started to rise, a thought crept in that she couldn't shake. "You don't deserve this." She tried to ignore it, tried to quiet the voice that always waited at the edges. But it grew louder. And by the time Grace stirred, Ava had already pulled away. "Morning," Grace murmured, still half asleep. "Why do you look like you're about to break up with me, or buy a small country?" Ava tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Neither. I just have a lot on my mind." "You always do." Grace sat up, brushing hair from her face. "What is it?" "Nothing urgent." Ava stood, pulling on her shirt. "Just the world knocking." "You've been letting it knock without answering. Don't start opening doors now." Ava paused at the window. "It's not that easy." "It could be." Grace's voice had a hint of something Ava hadn't heard in a while.
Fear.
Ava turned. "I'm not pushing you away. But you're pulling yourself away. I can feel it." Ava opened her mouth, closed it again. Grace did now too, arms crossed. Don't do this thing where you spiral quietly and shut me out like it's noble. If you're scared, tell me. If you're overwhelmed, say it. But don't shut down. I'm not shutting down, Ava said, sharper than intended. Grace flinched. Ava stepped forward immediately. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to mess this up. Then talk to me. Ava hesitated. Then, quietly, what if I'm not built for this? Grace blinked. For what? For being known. For being loved without conditions. For letting someone see every crack and still stay. Grace's voice softened. You are built for this. You just never had the right person trying to see you before. Ava looked away. You're better than me. That's not true. You fight for people. You save people. And her voice cracked. I manipulate. I perform. I hide. That's what I'm good at. That's what you used to be good at. Grace crossed the space between them.
But now?
Now you're good at showing up. At trying. At choosing me, even when it's hard. Ava's throat tightened. Grace's hand cupped her cheek. You don't have to be perfect to be loved, Ava. You deserve someone less complicated. I deserve someone real. And you're the most real thing I've ever had. Ava's chest trembled. I don't want to lose you. Then stop standing so far away when I'm right here. Ava finally leaned in, resting her forehead against Grace's. Don't give up on me. Not unless you ask me to. Never. Grace kissed her, slow and grounding. But under it, Ava still felt the edges of fear pressing in. That night, when Grace left to visit her sister across town, Ava sat alone in the penthouse and let the quiet wrap around her like a warning. She tried to focus, opened her laptop, checked on a proposal, but her phone buzzed, an unknown number. At first, she ignored it. Then it buzzed again. This time, a message. You really think people are buying it? The poor girl and the billionaire?
Cute.
But not sustainable. Her blood ran cold. Another message. How much did you pay her to stay? And another. Does she know what your company really does in South America? Ava stared at the screen. Then her phone rang. The number again. She didn't pick up. But the voicemail came through. When she listened to it, her stomach dropped. A voice, digitally distorted, but male, saying things about Grace.
Personal things.
Intimate things. Things Ava had never told anyone. She froze. Then dialed her head of security. I need you to trace a number. And I need it now. Is this a threat? It's a warning. And someone just made Grace a target. The team mobilized instantly. The messages were traced to a burner. The number disappeared. But the damage was done. Ava sat in her office, hands shaking, realizing something that terrified her more than anything else had. Grace was no longer just someone she loved. She was someone the world could hurt. And Ava couldn't protect her. The next morning, Grace arrived with coffee, smiling. I survived family drama and brought caffeine as my victory prize. Ava didn't smile back. We need to talk. Grace's face fell. What happened? Ava showed her the texts. Played the voicemail. Grace went pale. Jesus. They're targeting you now. I can handle it. You shouldn't have to. Grace's voice was calm but firm. I'm not running, Ava. Not from you. Not from this. I don't want you to get hurt. Then let me decide what I can take. Ava stepped back. If something happened to you because of me... No, Grace's voice broke. Don't you dare push me away again. I'm not pushing you away. Then don't build the wall. Don't lock the door. Let me stay. Ava's eyes filled. I don't know how. Grace cupped her face. Then I'll teach you.
Day by day.
But only if you stop trying to protect me by removing yourself from my life. Ava finally broke. The tears came, silent, messy, unguarded. And Grace pulled her in and held her until her body stopped shaking. You're not alone, Grace whispered. You've never been less alone. And this time, Ava let herself believe it. They didn't leave the apartment for 3 days. Ava canceled meetings, interviews, dinners. Grace skipped 2 shifts at the center. They shut the world out not out of fear, but out of defiance. Because something had shifted. Not between them, but around them. The messages hadn't returned. Ava's security team had swept the penthouse, traced all activity, tripled digital firewalls, but whoever had sent those threats was careful, experienced, intentional. They left no trace. No digital fingerprint. No name. Ava didn't admit it out loud, but she'd seen this pattern before. Corporate sabotage. Reputation warfare. She had enemies.
Plenty of them.
And Grace? She was collateral in someone's power game. Ava paced at night. She didn't sleep. She replayed the voicemail in her mind until it became a kind of sick rhythm. Does she know what your company really does in South America? The question that didn't come from nowhere. Because Ava did know. There were contracts, investments, subdivisions she hadn't touched in years, buried under layers of delegation. But now, she couldn't ignore them. And she couldn't risk Grace being dragged into something deeper, darker, more dangerous than either of them had prepared for. You're spiraling again, Grace said one evening, sitting on the edge of the piano bench, watching Ava cross the living room for the 10th time. I'm not. Your face says you're about to fire half your board or start a private war. Both are tempting. Ava. Ava stopped. She turned. What if I told you there's something I haven't looked at? Something in the company. Something that could explain all of this. Grace straightened. What kind of something? Foreign investments. Old projects. The kind of things I signed off on without reading because I trusted the wrong people. Grace stood and crossed to her. Then look at them now. Face them. If there's something toxic under your name, tear it out. What if it hurts us? What if it saves us? Ava's jaw tightened. You believe I can fix it? I believe you have to. Ava searched her face for fear. Found only determination. Grace didn't want to be protected. She wanted to fight with her. Together. Okay, Ava said. Then we go to war. The next day, Ava called a private meeting with her internal legal team, her ethics advisor, and her chief of global operations. No PR. No board. No spin. Just truth. Pull every record from the South American division from the last 10 years, she ordered. I want full transparency. Names, partners, shell companies, logistics, everything. Ava, that's massive. Why now? Her ethics officer asked. Ava met his eyes coldly. Because someone just reminded me that silence makes me complicit. What they found made her sick. Unethical labor contracts. Third-party mining operations with environmental violations. A logistics firm linked to government bribes. Nothing directly under her name, but all under Morteca's. Ava's empire. Her signature. How deep does it go? She asked, staring at the documents with shaking hands. Deep enough to destroy the brand if it gets out, her legal lead said quietly. Ava exhaled. Then we burn it down before they do. What? We go public. Ava. We release the documents. We confess. We take the hit. We restructure from scratch. The shareholders will crucify you. Ava looked away. Let them try. Grace wasn't surprised when Ava told her. She was proud. You're doing the right thing. I might lose everything. Not everything. Ava met her eyes. Grace held her hand. I'm still here. I don't deserve you. That's not your call to make. The day the exposé went live, Morteca's stock dropped 32%. News outlets exploded. Headlines screamed. Shareholders raged. But something else happened, too. Whistleblower groups applauded the transparency. Activist networks called it historic. And Grace? Grace watched the whole thing unfold from the couch, Ava's hand in hers, her thumb gently rubbing circles against her palm. You okay? She asked. No, Ava admitted. But I'm free. The next few days were chaos. Ava stood in front of cameras and owned every mistake. Not with rehearsed lines. With sincerity. She promised full investigations, reparations, immediate changes. And then she made one final move. She stepped down. Effective immediately, she said at a press conference, I resign as CEO of Mortec. I will dedicate my energy and resources to repairing what was broken under my name. The room erupted. Ava didn't flinch. That night, the city was loud, but her apartment was quiet. Grace poured them wine. "So," she said, raising her glass, "to losing everything. To letting go of the wrong things to hold on to the right ones. To choosing love over legacy. To building something new." They clinked glasses. Ava looked at her. Really looked. "Would you ever want to build something with me?" Grace paused. "Like what?" "A foundation. A fund. Something that actually helps. Run by you.
Funded by me.
But ours." Grace stared. "You do that. I want your name on the door. I want your heart in the mission. And I want your fire at the center of it." Grace smiled slowly. "Then yes, we build." Ava exhaled, something deep and locked inside her finally breaking open. And when Grace leaned in, cupping her jaw and kissing her with something soft and reverent, Ava kissed her back like the past was behind them and the future had just opened its hands.
6 weeks.
That's how long it took to turn rock bottom into the foundation of something new. 6 weeks since Ava Moore stood in front of the world and dismantled her empire with her own 2 hands. 6 weeks since Grace took her hand and said, "Let's build." Now, they stood side by side in the lobby of a renovated brick building in Harlem. Exposed beams overhead. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A bold new sign mounted on the glass. The Haven Initiative, founded by Grace Holloway and Ava Moore. It didn't look like a monument to power. That was intentional. This wasn't a palace. It was a safe place. A resource hub. A sanctuary. And every inch of it screamed Grace's vision and Ava's unapologetic funding. "I still don't believe this is real," Grace said softly, arms crossed as she turned in a slow circle. "The desk is reclaimed wood, Ava. I told you, no chrome, no ivory, no billionaire aesthetic. But the espresso machine is nicer than any apartment I've ever rented." Ava grinned. Compromises had to be made. Grace stepped into her arms, her voice quieter now. "We did this." "You did this," Ava whispered into her hair. "I just gave it a roof. You gave it your name. Your legacy." "No," Ava said. "I gave it back to the people who deserved it. The press still followed them. They always would. But something had changed in the way the world looked at them. Grace wasn't just the girlfriend. She was a founder now. A face. A force. And Ava? Ava had stopped trying to perform. She no longer needed rooms to respect her out of fear. Now, she commanded presence with purpose. Their first public event was a panel on ethical rebuilding, corporate transparency, community reinvestment, deconstructing power. Ava sat between Grace and a grassroots housing activist. She didn't speak the most. But when she did speak, it was with clarity, honesty. No polish. No mask. And when Grace leaned over after the event and said, "You were brilliant," Ava didn't say thank you. She said, "Only because you stood beside me." At night, they cooked together.
Badly.
Ava still burned toast. Grace was hopeless with timing. But they danced to music in the kitchen, bare feet on marble floors, wine in their hands, laughter spilling through the penthouse like a memory they'd finally earned. "This place feels different now," Grace said one night, curled against Ava on the couch. "It used to intimidate me. And now it feels like home." Ava kissed her temple. "Because you're here." "No," Grace whispered. "Because you are." Ava exhaled. She didn't cry, but something inside her softened in a way it never had before. She kissed Grace like that truth lived between their lips, like she could taste the life they were building. But nothing was ever that clean. The person who sent the threatening text still hadn't been identified. The investigation had hit dead ends, and while security was tight, there was always that sliver of unease. One morning, Grace opened a letter. No return address. Just a single line handwritten in red ink. "You really think people forget?" She didn't tell Ava immediately.
She meant to.
But Ava had just come home from another donor pitch meeting, cheeks flushed with excitement, smiling like she used to only smile behind boardroom doors. "It's working," Ava had said, dropping her bag on the floor. They're finally seeing what we're trying to do. Grace had forced a smile. That's amazing. But that night, after Ava fell asleep, Grace sat on the edge of the bed, reading that sentence over and over. The next day, Ava found the letter in the trash. Grace hadn't even hidden it well. Her hands shook as she pulled it out, unfolded it, read it twice, then stormed into the kitchen. When were you going to tell me? Grace froze mid-step. Ava, don't lie. I wasn't trying to keep it from you. I just didn't want to ruin the moment. You were happy. Ava's voice was low and sharp. You're getting threats again, and I'm walking around smiling like an idiot? You deserve to smile. Grace snapped. You've sacrificed more than anyone even knows. That doesn't mean I get to ignore what's happening to you. Grace stepped forward. I'm not fragile. I've dealt with worse. I just didn't want this place, this life we're building, to become about fear again. Ava exhaled, her jaw clenched. We don't get to choose when we're safe, Grace. But we do get to face it together. No more secrets. Not from you. Not from me. Okay, Grace said softly. No more secrets. The next week, the investigation finally paid off. Kara called Ava while she and Grace were mid-lunch. We have a name, Kara said. One of the anonymous board members from your pre-resignation circle. Used a proxy server, untraceable email. He was betting against Morteka's recovery and targeting Grace to keep you distracted and unstable. Ava felt her stomach twist. What happens now? You already stepped down. You're untouchable. But him? We've got enough to take him down hard. Want to bury him? Ava looked at Grace across the table. Then at the life they were building. The coffee cups. The grant documents. The real, raw future in front of them. No, Ava said. Just make sure he never comes near her again. Grace raised an eyebrow as Ava hung up. You didn't go full Game of Thrones on him? I wanted to. Why didn't you? Ava smiled. Because I've already won. Grace blinked. You think this is a win? Ava leaned across the table.
You.
Here.
Us.
That's the only thing I ever wanted. Grace reached for her hand. Then let's stop surviving. Let's start living. Ava nodded. Together. Always. The ceremony wasn't extravagant. There were no reporters, no designer gowns, no billion-dollar venue dripping in chandeliers and champagne fountains. It took place in the back garden of the Haven Initiative, beneath a canopy of twinkle lights, with mismatched chairs, tables covered in sunflowers, and a guest list made up of exactly 32 people, family, friends, clients from the center, a few former board allies, and one old woman who used to run the bakery where Grace worked in college. Ava stood at the edge of the garden in a simple white linen suit. No jewelry, no makeup, just herself, and a look in her eyes like she was ready to give away everything she'd ever been in exchange for the woman walking toward her. Grace wore pale gold. No veil. Her hair pinned up loosely, curls soft against her shoulders, smile trembling like she couldn't quite believe this was real. But it was. Everything about this was real. There had been no grand proposal. No viral moment. Just a night on the rooftop 3 months after the threat stopped. The world had quieted, and Ava had finally exhaled long enough to feel peace in her chest. They'd been sharing a bottle of wine. Grace had been sitting between Ava's legs, her head tilted back on Ava's shoulder, looking at the stars. You know I want forever with you, right? Grace had said, so casual it took Ava a second to understand. I'm not asking.
Not yet.
I just want you to know. Ava had kissed her cheek. I already knew. But a week later, Ava had taken Grace back to that first park, the one with the fountain, the one where they almost kissed before everything unraveled. She didn't get on one knee. She didn't make a speech. She just looked Grace in the eye and said, let's stop almost. Grace had said yes before she even realized she was crying. Now they stood facing each other in front of people who loved them. A soft breeze stirred the lights overhead. Grace reached for Ava's hands and squeezed them once. I was so scared the first time I saw you, she said. Not because you were mysterious or beautiful or clearly smarter than me, though all of that was true, but because something about you made me feel like I could be seen. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that.
I'm still scared sometimes.
But every time I look at you, I remember what it feels like to be brave. Ava's fingers tightened around hers. I didn't believe in love when I met you, she said. I believed in survival, in strategy, in keeping my heart out of reach. But you didn't just reach it. You walked straight into it like it belonged to you. And now I can't imagine breathing in a world where you're not mine. They exchanged rings. No elaborate vows. Just a quiet promise pressed into skin. I choose you. Over and over. As long as we both wake up breathing. The kiss was soft. Almost shy. But everyone stood and clapped anyway. The kind of clapping that was louder than the moment required, because everyone knew what this had cost. Everyone knew what they'd survived. And what they'd finally earned. Later, while guests were dancing and champagne flutes clinked in every direction, Grace dragged Ava to a corner near the garden gate and whispered, "You didn't cry." I almost cried. But you didn't. I'm crying on the inside, Ava teased. It's very efficient. Liar. Ava smiled, then cupped Grace's face with both hands. Do you want to disappear with me for a week?
Depends.
Are we talking private island or hiking boots? Neither. Just you and me. Somewhere with a bed, good coffee, and absolutely no cameras. And no boardrooms? No suits. No phones. Just soft sheets and quiet mornings. Grace leaned in. You drive a hard bargain, more. Ava kissed her like they had nowhere to be for the rest of their lives. They did disappear. For 12 days, they lived in a small coastal town with no reception, where they slept in until noon, read books under the covers, cooked together, fought over who made the better tea, and had long, slow sex with the windows open to the sound of the waves. Ava laughed more in those 12 days than she had in years. Grace wrote again, just for herself. One night, Ava woke to find her sitting at the table by the window, scribbling something with her glasses on and hair falling around her face. What are you writing? Ava murmured, sleep-heavy. Something I want to show the kids when we open the second haven next year. Ava blinked. Second. We're expanding, Grace said simply, like it was obvious. The grant came through, and I think it's time. Ava sat up, watching her. You're going to change the world. No, Grace said, standing and climbing back into bed. We are. Ava wrapped her arms around her and whispered, as long as you're next to me. Always. A year later, the second haven opened. Grace gave a speech. Ava stood in the back, unnoticed. Watching.
Proud.
In love. 2 years later, Ava quietly returned to business, but not as CEO. She became an advisor, a mentor, someone who taught young women how to lead without losing their soul. She never gave interviews about Grace. She didn't have to. Their story was already written in every building they funded together, every home they helped secure, every life they changed. Ava never went back to hiding. Not behind designer clothes, not behind strategy, not behind silence. Because every night, she came home to Grace. And Grace never stopped looking at her like she was enough, even on bad days. Especially on bad days. They fought. They stumbled. They grew. But through it all, they stayed. And in every morning breath, in every shared laugh, in every stolen kiss while making coffee, there was one simple truth Ava more finally let herself believe. She was loved. Not for her power, not for her name, but for who she was when she let someone all the way in. And Grace had never once stopped choosing her. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.